In this section, we're going to examine the rise of the Roman Republic's empire. Remember, like I said, they have a system of government that is a republic. However, they're going to form an empire, meaning they're going to control groups of people different than themselves, right? It's going to be a multicultural, multi-ethnic, multilingual empire that the republic is going to be increasingly controlling. So, just as kind of a review, remember, the republic, even though it had inequalities and problems in it, especially between the patricians and the plebeians, they were able, through the republic and through this compromise, able to resolve conflicts, bringing sufficient stability, allowing them to expand out of Rome and to conquer the Italian peninsula. And remember that it's complex, but they will be extending citizenship to many of the people they conquered, making them, in a sense, Roman. So what's going to happen is the identity of what it means to be Roman is going to expand, where it will go from just being a member of a particular city-state to being something broader. So not only are they going to go out and conquer people, they're going to be successful at making those people feel like they're part of the empire, or at least successful enough so that there's not too many rebellions. And I want to stress that's why I say sufficient stability. The Romans still have to deal with rebellions. There are still people who don't like being a part of their growing empire, but they keep things stable enough that when one person rebels, other groups will stay loyal to the Romans, and they'll always be able to put these rebellions down. So now, as you can see from this map, Rome has developed so that they've conquered the Italian peninsula, and so they're able to look out. And they're going to start running into the Carthaginian Empire. The Carthaginians, their empire is doing quite well. They've got southern Spain, much of North Africa. The Carthaginian Empire is similar to the Romans in that it's somewhat sort of aristocratic. It doesn't have as much of the republic or democratic aspects. So, again, I don't want you to think Rome is as democratic as Athens was. It wasn't, but it was much more democratic than what the Carthaginians had. And whereas whereas Rome is primarily a military power, they follow a warrior culture. It's much more militaristic. The Carthaginians are primarily a trading empire, right? They're primarily interested in merchant activities. And one thing I should point out, the whole reason that the Carthaginians even got set up, they were initially Phoenicians, but they were so threatened by the Assyrians that they fled their home, many of them did, and then established this empire in southern Spain and northwest Africa. So they're a merchant aristocratic empire, so they're a bit different from the Romans. It's not as big of a difference between the Greeks and the Persians, but there is a difference here, enough that the Romans did not like them and they did not like the Romans. Now, to see where the flashpoint is, it's here in Sicily, right? If you're the Romans and you're interested in expanding, now that you've got the peninsula stabilized, it's logical to go to Sicily. Well, guess what? That's where the Carthaginians have already established some power, and they're wanting to get the whole island. So that's going to be kind of the flashpoint. That's where they're going to be running into each other. So we're going to talk about the series of wars that the Romans and the Carthaginians fought against each other, and we call those the Punic Wars. Like the Peloponnesian Wars, there were several of them. I'm not going to go into detail on each one. But like I said, mutual interest in expansion into Sicily is going to lead to the First Punic War, which the Romans win. Right? The Romans are going to win that war. Now, there is a man named Hamilcar, and he was one of the generals, probably the best general of the Carthaginians, perhaps even the best in the whole war. He was a very good general. And he was really frustrated that the Carthaginians gave up. Why? Well, he was undefeated, and he still had an army in the field. So when the Romans defeated the Carthaginian Empire, they were still capable of fighting. It's just that the merchants in charge of the empire said, this is costing us too much money. We want to be done with it. This really frustrated Hamilcar because he was like, we can keep fighting. We can win this. I haven't been defeated. I've got an army. Let's keep it up. But he's a general. He's not in charge of the government. The government, following merchant interests, says, we're done. We'll just make a deal with Rome. And Rome agreed to a reasonable peace. This was not a harsh peace on Carthage, and that's one reason why the merchant government accepted it. Now, here's the thing that's really bizarre, is that when the war was over, the mercenaries who've been fighting for the Carthaginians, and they had a bunch of mercenaries. Remember, they're mostly focused on merchant activities. They don't have a military culture. So a lot of their soldiers are not citizen soldiers like they are in Rome. They're mercenaries. After the war was over, basically the government, the Carthaginian government said, hey, mercenaries, we don't need you guys anymore. We're done. And the mercenaries were like, great, can we be paid? You know, we worked for you. Would you please pay us? And the Carthaginian Empire said, nah, we're not going to pay you. So, of course, then the mercenaries attacked the Carthaginian Empire, and the Carthaginian Empire had to fight to put down the mercenaries. And it would have been just better to pay them. And, of course, Hamilcar is even more frustrated by this. He's like, we could have kept fighting, right? We had the mercenaries, and we were able to defeat them. If we would have just used them to help us fight the Romans, we could have beat the Romans. So Hamilcar is mad as all get out. Now, why do I keep talking about Hamilcar, someone you probably never heard of, to help you understand Hannibal, who you most likely have heard of? And Hamilcar made his, he had several sons, made his sons, but the one we're really going to focus on is Hannibal, take an oath that basically swore that they would destroy Rome. So Hamilcar hates Rome, he's angry at his government, and he tells his sons, you're going to hate Rome too. He makes them, they go to a temple and take an oath that they will destroy Rome. And Hannibal takes his oath very seriously. His father, who he is very close to, has been treated wrongly by Rome, he feels, and he wants to go avenge his father. Eventually, Hamilcar will die, and then later on, Hannibal will be in a position where he can launch an attack on Rome. And I won't go into detail here, but I just have to say that Hannibal is and Hamilcar were geniuses in that the way they were able to provoke a war with Rome. So this is going to lead to a second Punic War, right, between Rome and Carthage. And the thing is, Hannibal is just amazing. This guy is just a genius. Just to give you an idea of how tough he was, he got an eye infection from campaigning, and so he just took a knife and pulled out his own eye to prevent the infection from spreading. So he was really tough. He was also really smart. So remember how I said that one advantage that the Romans had was that they had the Alps to the north. Remember there's that mountain range in northern Italy called the Alps that gave them protection. Well, Hannibal, just not only did he lead an army over those mountains, which is really hard, he brought elephants with him. He brought elephants from North Africa up into Spain, crossed the Alps, brought them into Italy. And this was no easy task. I mean, they're elephants, so he had to build special bridges, special boats, and get them over mountains. But he pulled it off, and of course, he surprised the Romans because they had no idea that elephants were going to be, that any army, let alone one with elephants, was going to be coming from the north. So he surprises the Romans and wins a bunch of victories. And one thing I have to tell you about, I don't usually talk that much about specific battles and the tactics that were used, but I have to talk about this one because lots of military commanders have tried to imitate what Hannibal did at the Battle of Kanae. But in the Battle of Kanae, you had the Roman army here fighting a smaller Carthaginian army led by Hannibal. Remember, they're in Italy. And what's amazing about this, Hannibal successfully encircled the Roman army and destroyed it, even though his army was smaller. Right? So it's very hard to encircle an army when that army is smaller than yours. Imagine how much harder it is when that army is bigger, but Hannibal was just such a genius that he pulled it off. Now, how did he do it? Well, he put his weakest troops in the middle, but then he stood there with them. So he knew then that if they were weak troops, they'd be pushed back, but if he was with them, they wouldn't run away. And he put his strong troops here and here. And notice he also, you may not be able to read this, but it says Numidian cavalry. Numidian cavalry, Numidia is in Africa, and they were really good cavalry who were working with the Carthaginians. And they were much better than Roman cavalry. So what happens is the Roman cavalry is destroyed by the Numidian cavalry. The infantry isn't worrying too much about them, though. The Roman infantry is going to march forward, and they're going to push back these Carthaginians. Remember, I said these are the weak troops. They're here. But they aren't going to run away. They're just going to be pushed back because Hannibal is with them. What happens then is that what the Roman soldiers don't realize, though, is that these troops are in the same place. So these troops move back, the Romans pull forward, and now the Romans are surrounded. Because the Romans are here now with the good troops, the strong troops of Hannibal to the north and to the south, and the weaker troops are here, and that Numidian cavalry has defeated the Roman cavalry so they can get behind the Romans and hit them from behind. So now the Romans are encircled, and what's happened is they've been in such a rush to crush the center of the Carthaginian lines that they are crushed together. The Romans are like really tightly packed, so they can't maneuver, they can't fight well, and now they're surrounded and they're absolutely destroyed. Tens of thousands of Romans die in this battle. The Romans, like I said, they outnumbered the Carthaginians. Remember, the Romans are good soldiers, but Hannibal's just such a genius that not only does he defeat them, he takes very few casualties, and he actually managed to encircle a bigger army with a smaller army. And I kid you not, the Romans developed what is called the Fabian Strategy. Right? The Romans developed what's called the Fabian Strategy. Fabian was a consul, and his strategy was, we can't win in a battle against Hannibal, so let's just not fight him. Let's just kind of follow him around Italy and let him destroy stuff, but we won't let him rest, and maybe he'll get tired and go home. That was Fabian's strategy, right? We can't beat Hannibal, so let's just annoy him and bug him until he gets tired and leaves. That was the best that the Romans could do for a while. Right? That's the best they could do. And I just include this image just to show you, this is Hannibal here. This is a Roman eagle standard, the flag they carried into battle, and he's got it upside down here. He's standing on one. When he defeated the Roman aristocracy, when he defeated them, they wore rings on their arms, like armbands, and they collected those after the battle and threw them on the floor, tens of thousands of these armbands on the floor of the Carthaginian Senate. So Hannibal is almost unstoppable. But here's the thing. The Romans win the war. So imagine that, right? The Romans win a war that they have gone down in history for losing a battle in which they were encircled by a smaller army. Right? So the Romans are remembered for an embarrassing defeat, yet somehow they win the war. And this is key to understanding why Rome was able to expand and why it was such a successful empire and civilization. So why did the Romans win? First of all, a fundamental loyalty to the state. Remember the story of Cincinnatus? You had this kind of basic patriotism. And while there was often conflict in Rome, the Senate and the people of Rome, the plebeians and the patricians, always figured out some way to compromise, at least during this time period. They always figured out some way to compromise. So there was this sense of loyalty to Rome. So even though a Roman army might be defeated, another one could always be raised as long as there were still Romans living. Right? As long as there were still Romans alive, they were willing to be loyal to Rome and to keep fighting. Now this happens in a later war, but to give you a sense of the anger and the desire to win among the Romans, and this is probably because of their military culture, there was a Roman senator named Cato, and he ended every speech with, Carthage must be destroyed. And I mean every speech. So if he was like giving a speech about the budget, he'd be like, yeah, I think we need to add a 0.05% annum tax on cattle. And, oh, by the way, Carthage must be destroyed. Right? That's how he ended every speech. So the Romans had this deep sense of loyalty to their state, this kind of patriotism, and this anger, patriotic rage that just kept them going. And because of this, they could continuously build up their armies. Right? They could continuously build up their armies. Hannibal destroys an army, no problem. We'll just build a new one. They also were good with diplomacy. So remember, key to the Carthaginians' victory at Kanae was the African Numidian cavalry. And you can buy models of the African Numidian cavalry. They're there. The Romans said, okay, You guys are working for the Carthaginians. What would it take to get you to work for us? And the Romans paid the price, and the Numidians switched from being allies of Carthage to allies of Rome. And they would betray the Carthaginians at the Battle of Zama, which would be a decisive defeat. Finally, the Romans finally got a really competent general, a man named Scipio Africanus. That's him pictured here. Scipio's fascinating. He would like go out into a garden and be talking, and he would just be talking, and people thought he was talking to himself. And someone basically said, "Hey, Scipio, why are you talking to yourself?" He's like, "I wasn't talking to myself. I was talking to Mars, god of war. He was telling me how I was going to win the next battle." So Scipio was convinced that he could talk to the gods, and the gods talked back, and they gave him good battle advice. And whether you want to believe that or not, he was an amazing general, and he defeated Hannibal. Basically what he did was he said, okay, we can't defeat Hannibal in Italy. Hannibal's running around Italy causing us all sorts of trouble. I'll just invade Carthage, and they will call him back. So they're saying the best defense is a good offense. He's like, just let Hannibal be in Italy. I'm going to invade Carthage. He'll be called back. And he was exactly right. The Carthaginian Empire, being primarily a trading empire, freaked out when there was an invading army near them, and instead of raising local forces, demanded that Hannibal come back. He came back, and then was defeated by Scipio Africanus with the allied Numidian cavalry. So they were able then to develop this in this way, the Romans were able to win. And I just want to point out, once the Carthaginians were defeated in this Battle of Zama, unlike the Romans, their government said, okay, we're done. I don't know if it's the military culture or what it was, but whereas the Romans were constantly willing to fight no matter what, no matter how many times they got beat, it seemed like you could beat them 10 times, they would come back at you in 11th. And they finally won a big battle, and the Carthaginians, having just lost this one major battle, just gave up. Hannibal was not happy about this in the least. Eventually, the Romans will force a third Punic War on the Carthaginians, destroy Carthage, and enslave the remaining Carthaginians. Forgiveness is not a virtue in the ancient world, alas. So that's the fate of poor Carthage at the hands of Rome. Incidentally, after this battle, Hannibal went to Persia in exile, basically, and Scipio Africanus was later sent there on a diplomatic mission, and they actually met, and they got in an argument about who was the better general. I think Scipio Africanus kind of won the argument since, he won the war, but in any case. What happens now then is this. Carthage was the serious contender to Roman power in the Mediterranean and in Africa. It's now gone. It's been destroyed. And that's going to allow the Romans the freedom to just expand as much as they want. Right? They defeated the one major power so they can take their territory. Now they can take all the other little areas too because they don't have a rival. So the Roman Empire, after its victory with Carthage, is not going to get its empire. It's going to continue to expand.